Hi, my name is Natalie Fenimore, and I am a student volunteer with the Conference on World Affairs. I'm also a senior at CU studying international affairs, French, and political science, and I'm so excited to welcome you to the CWA Business Committee's December event titled Business as Unusual, Finding the Way Forward. We all know exactly how much the world has changed recently, and most of us can't wait for things to get back to normal. But as normal becomes less attainable in the short term, businesses are having to adapt to a changing environment, and we're watching those changes happen in real time. This evening, join us for an exploration of the future of business accessed right from your home. We hope you enjoy tonight's discussion, and thanks for tuning in.
Welcome. I am John Terr, and I welcome you to the special Conference of World Affairs panel conversation, Business as Unusual and Finding the Way Forward. As we all know, COVID-19 has wreaked havoc on our economy and on whole industries and businesses, especially traditional retail and hospitality sectors. Boulder alone has seen a loss in retail and restaurant sales of near 20%, and we expect that to rise significantly due to the current surge in the virus and the resulting public health restrictions. And that said, there are certain industries that are faring well. Think of biotech, aerospace, food production, and real estate. So the impacts have been uneven. And of course, this is a global crisis with economic impacts that vary by state, across countries, and economic regions. So while most countries are still responding to the immediate crisis, there are also recovery plans underway, which also vary widely. Not surprisingly, economists, easy for me to say, project we will begin to see recovery as the vaccines become widely available. But some industries will still struggle, and some businesses may not survive. So in the face of these divergent impacts for industries and economic regions, the Conference of World Affairs wanted to begin the conversation about the way forward as we begin to emerge from the fog of the pandemic and commence the economic recovery process in earnest. So it's in that vein and typical of the Conference of World Practice that we have the benefit of hearing today from panelists with diverse backgrounds in economic analysis, industry support, and business leadership. These panelists will share their perspective on their observations of the pandemic's economic impacts. They'll also speak about how other nations, like China, are responding to the recovery challenge. And they will help us understand what that suggests for the trajectory for our economic recovery and maybe what the recipe is for success in that effort. We have with us today Keith Bradshaw, who's the Pulitzer Prize winning chief of the New York Times Shanghai Bureau. We have Jan Singer, who is the former CEO of J.Crew, and Jack Johnson, who is the Chief Advocacy Officer of Destinations International. I will provide significantly more information on their backgrounds when I have the chance to speak with them more directly. And we'll outline, but I first want to outline just a little bit about the conversation and the structure. Because unlike a typical CWA panel discussion where we would have just more exchange, I'm going to have a 20 minutes of focused conversation with each of today's panelists. And that will occur first with about 10 minutes for each of the panelists to offer their specific input on these issues, the economic recovery process and the way forward. And then we will have 10 minutes of Q&A that will include questions from you, the audience. So to that end, I want to make sure that you know that during these discussions, if you can please add your questions to the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen that you see here in front of you. We'll look through those questions and try to get to as many of them as possible. Now, if you're a CU student, please note that. We want to give special attention to our CU students. And also for all of you, please just let us know where you're checking in from. It'd be really interesting to know how far and wide the CWA panel conversation is projecting. So with that, I want to just get right into it and start with our first panelist, Keith Bradsher. And he is the, as I said, Pulitzer Prize winning Shanghai bureau chief for the New York Times. And is also the newspaper's senior writer for Asian and economics and business. Just a little bit more on him, just give you a sense of the value of his perspective. He's previously served as the Hong Kong bureau chief and the Detroit bureau chief for the Times. Before this posting, he was the Washington correspondent for the Times, covering the Federal Reserve and international trade. He received a master's degree in public policy with a concentration on economics from the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton University. So there's no question that Keith is the right person to give us an international perspective on this COVID-19 impacts and to think with us about how our country might respond and begin its recovery process. So Keith, why don't you please take it away with your opening thoughts?
Hi, John, and thank you for inviting me to the conference. So first of all, for China at least, the title of this panel is not quite as applicable because in many ways by now, it is business as usual in China. The steel mills are running flat out to make steel because you've got a very brisk pace of construction for everything from new apartment buildings to highways. Even travel and tourism is at about 80% of previous levels based on the national holiday travel figures recently. I am in Anhui province this morning. I took a bullet train here yesterday, 4 hours south from Beijing, and it was fairly full. I was on a flight from Fuzhou in southern China to Beijing on Sunday, also fairly full. Restaurants are mostly full. People have, to a considerable extent, stopped wearing masks, except in Beijing or places that have recently had a couple of cases. How is that possible? China has done a lot to control the outbreak and takes very quick measures when there are isolated cases. Now, you had 4 or 5 cases in Tianjin a week ago, and within a day after announcing that they were starting testing, they'd already tested 1.7 million people. They have extremely rapid contact tracing, so when somebody does come down with the virus, which tends to be somebody who has had some kind of a contact with the outside world, such as recently occasionally port workers involved in handling cold goods. When somebody is in that situation, they very quickly can do contact tracing for large numbers of people. Whether other countries would accept the sometimes extreme measures that China has taken to track people in terms of people tracking is far from clear. I think Americans have generally not wanted to have the kind of very detailed people tracking that you see in China, an ability to find anybody who might have been anywhere near anybody very quickly. And the lockdowns here were enforced with greater severity last spring than anywhere else in the world, with sometimes brutal tactics in terms of people who went out anyway getting beaten up, and in terms of highly restrictive rules on movement, not allowing anybody out of Wuhan, for example, for 76 days. But with that said, the economy itself is looking a lot better. Now, if you compare then to the United States, one of the reasons why China is able to do better, however, is that it has a much more manufacturing-based economy. And so very early, they were able to get the factories up and running again. Companies were required to provide a mask per day for every worker in the factories, but because China dominates world production of personal protection equipment, they were able to very quickly supply those masks. and they had very high compliance. So you had pretty much universal mask usage until all day long, everywhere people went, until the virus was gone here. The structure of Chinese economic measures has also been very different from the West. In the West, you've tended to focus on payments to support people's everyday consumption. For example, $600 a week to help people cope while they were an extra $600 a week to help people cope while they were unemployed last spring. In China, the government did almost nothing for consumers. Instead, the focus was on keeping businesses going through a lot of very cheap loans. I've spoken with small businesses here, and it wasn't a question of their calling their bank for a loan. It was the bank calling them saying, please take a loan to make sure you've got enough cash flow. They very quickly processed a lot of small tax refunds to get that money out to businesses so they wouldn't close during the weeks that there was a problem here. So I can think of another business that had 15 different small tax refunds to make sure that they had cash last spring when they were in trouble. That was, little things, for example, giving them a partial refund on their unemployment insurance payments from 2019. So they were able to keep the businesses going. How is it that people were able to survive? In an odd way, it was advantageous for China that this happened right at the start of Chinese New Year, because practically everybody was home. An unusually large portion of the country was in home villages that they otherwise might seldom visit. And in the home villages, you tend to have a lot of food from the previous crop. You tend to have, everybody has a home, so they're not having to worry about rent payments so much. So they were able to focus their measures on keeping businesses going, on making sure the economy kept running. Finally, there's one last advantage that's worth mentioning, is that China does not just specialize, or does not just have a very large manufacturing and construction sector as a share of its economy, but it also manufactures a lot of the things that are particularly popular right now. So China is the world's dominant producer of consumer electronics, and demand for consumer electronics is up and away. China is the world's dominant producer of bicycles. Bicycle purchases all over the world are up and away. With that, you've had really very strong growth in Chinese exports to most markets, although not the US. The tariffs have made a bit of a difference there, as the US has been looking for a little more diversity in its sources of supply. But China has been able to keep the exports going. It has been able to keep most of the service sector going. It certainly has been able to keep the construction sector going very strongly. They're building even more bullet train lines. And the result is that in many ways, it is business more as usual as opposed to unusual, with the IMF forecasting growth over 8% next year for the Chinese economy. Thank you, John.
And well, thank you, Keith. So maybe just a couple of questions for me, and then I see already somebody putting a question in the chat, but just to get the ball rolling, you talk about some of the more cultural advantages that you described that may be advantageous to China in their recovery process. And I'm wondering if there are any of those that you would say are adaptable then for the United States, something that we would think, if we could do this, that would be an opportunity for us to recover faster.
The level of community spirit in China is often striking. So I was in a village in southwestern China about 3 weeks ago, and I asked people there, how did it go during the outbreak last spring? And they said, well, there was a period of about 6 weeks, nobody went out. And they said they'd never actually been ordered by the police not to leave their homes. They just didn't want to. They all knew their neighbors. There were volunteers who set up checkpoints at the entrances to the village. They were checking people's temperatures coming into the village. But mostly the village was closed to the outside world. People had already come back in into the village who were out of towners for Chinese New Year, coincidentally right before. So it wasn't as though you had people fleeing the city to come into the village. They were already there to be with their families. And so nobody went in or out for about 6 weeks, but everybody stayed home. They said they were not even aware of there having been a formal police order. There was a lot of national media coverage of just how horrible things were in Wuhan.
Yeah.
And so there was good participation in the lockdown there. Now, and in Shanghai, there was a high level of cooperation. Everybody did wear masks. However, I can remember once just while walking outdoors and I'd taken off my mask for a moment because I was nowhere near anybody. And a police officer 20 meters away waved at me to put my mask back on. I was on a street. So I think that the level of community spirit is important, and a sense that that everybody was in it together, and that has helped. Now that said, there are some things that the United States would not do. There's a police training video of somebody being stopped, for how to handle somebody being stopped at a toll booth for a temperature check coming out of an area that had a problem. And the individual in the training, and again, this is just an exercise, hops out of his car and takes off his mask, starts yelling at the officer, and immediately out of nowhere, somebody comes and wraps a brown cloth bag, mesh bag over his head, and wraps plastic ties around his hands at the back. And he's hustled away, and then the police all spray each other down with disinfectant. The police already all in hazmat gear anyway for checking somebody's temperature coming out of a restricted area. And since then, you've tended to see that was back in the early days. Now under that kind of a situation, you wouldn't be able to get out of the restricted area anyway with the temperature check. You have to be able to show a QR code on your phone showing you haven't been anywhere in a place that is restricted, that is highly restricted for virus reasons, and then also that you haven't been anywhere near anybody who might have had it.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So it sounds like an element of the culture, the community-ist nature of the society, but also some of the enforcement practices which may conflict with principles, U.S. principles.
And it's not just, I hesitate to use the word cultural. I think other countries have done very well against COVID as well. They've tended to be ones that, and including most of them are democracies. There was a recent ranking I saw that out of the top 10 countries in handling the virus, 8 of them were democracies. New Zealand has managed to completely eliminate the virus. Australia seems to have managed to get it under control. Taiwan, another democracy, has done a terrific job of controlling it. So it is, what seems most important is a high level of community cooperation.
Yeah. Okay, well, let me get to some of these questions, and I want to, maybe we'll just quickly try to hit them because there's 2 here. So first of all, one, to the extent that some see China as an economic competitor, has it gained advantages due to its response to COVID? And conversely, does its more robust market offer opportunities for international business?
China has gained a short-term advantage by bringing the virus quickly under control because it only had several really bad months. Now, China does still have long-term problems. China has a very high level of debt compared to its economy, and they've been piling on even more debt to get out of the effects of the pandemic. So just extraordinary growth this year in mortgages. How are they paying for all of these new apartment buildings they're paying all the time? It's mostly banks issuing mortgages at an extraordinary pace. And that could easily come back to haunt China at some point. There are, I was just talking recently to somebody in a different place in southeastern China. And the last time I saw that person, they bought their fourth apartment. I said, how did that happen? I mean, you're just living on your salary. Well, each time they bought an apartment, a couple of years later, they refinanced and bought another one. And I said, so what happened to that fourth apartment? Well, she had sold the fourth apartment and bought two more. So now she has 5 apartments. And yet she's paying 6.5% a year on the mortgages. But the rental income she's getting is only 1.5% of the value of the apartment. So each year, she has to sink another 5% of the value of the apartment into that apartment. That's a lot of money. In 4 years, that's the equivalent of a 20% down payment. However, because real estate prices have always been going up until now, they end up with, she's still made money. Now, how long will that go on? You've got even more housing price inflation here in the last last several years, because there are still a lot of mortgages. So short term, China has gained an advantage. Medium and long term, China, like every country, faces problems. But I should mention the United States has also piled on a lot of debt during this downturn, and it doesn't have the economic output to show for it. So overall, China has definitely fared better than almost anyone else.
Yeah, what you described was a Big Short kind of scenario there. So another question, an element of China society that folks are hearing about, and that is that the entertainment business is starting to pick up there, and they're starting to have large events and concerts. Question is, do you have any sense of how they're keeping the virus down while still allowing for this normal, quote unquote, normal life to move forward?
They are having a lot of large events, and it has, you can go to a play, you can go to a concert. The real secret was to eradicate the virus before you start having people going out and getting together again. And so the focus, instead of checking people going in the door, is to make sure that the virus is not in a city at all. And then you allow people to get together. And so they've done that through the contact tracing. Several months ago, still, to get into any building or even to get into a public park, I had to show on my cell phone the tracking code that showed that I had not been anywhere that had the virus. I mean, a public park. And each time I travel between provinces, as I seem to do quite often, frequently, it depends on the province, but I often have to download their program because it is separate by province, that shows where that connects that province's health records to my movement, to my cell phone's movements, and therefore allows them to see if I have been in any community or part of a community that has had a virus outbreak. There are still other restrictions, again, though, that other countries might not want to accept. So separating children from their parents for medical isolation is not something that other countries might want to accept. China has also been very drastic, although New Zealand has as well, in cutting off international travel. So China halted 98% of international flights at the end of March. They've never resumed. More recently, they then began requiring that you have not only a COVID test, but also an antibody test before you are allowed to enter the country. So antibodies meaning even if you've had it in the last several months or been exposed to somebody and didn't get it, but you still got it. Even if you have antibodies, they will keep you out. And then even then you have to have permanent residency in China to get in, plus an antibody test, plus a PCR test. And then more recently, they said, well, even permanent residents of China from the following long list of countries, including Britain, France, India, Russia, Ethiopia, Iceland, and so forth, are not allowed in, even if they are a foreign resident, even if they have a negative antibody test, and even if they have a negative PCR test. So they really have closed the borders.
Wow. All right, well, I'm getting a sense of they control the virus, and that allows the economy to start to move forward. So that's exactly one of the things that we, of course, have talked about here, even in our own community. Well, Keith, why don't we do this? I'm going to transition to another one of our panelists, but I will say that this just excellent beginning of the conversation here, just from that international perspective and a community or country that is handling things quite differently. Well, let's now move to Jan Singer. And Jan is going to help us understand the perspective from an industry sector that has been quite damaged from the COVID impacts. And she's definitely an appropriate person to be having this conversation with. She has over 25 years of retail experience, most recently, as I said earlier, having served as the Chief Executive Officer for J. Crew. Prior to that role, she served as the CEO at Victoria's Secret Lingerie, at L Brands. I understand it's a brand of, it sounds like brand of Victoria's Secret, and at Spanx, one that I sometimes think with my COVID lifestyle, I need more Spanx. She also served in various executive roles at Nike, including most recently as corporate vice president for global apparel, and in merchandising and marketing and global communications roles for Reebok, Chanel, and Calvin Klein and Prada. She also serves as an independent board director for Kate Spade and Company. It's safe to say that she knows retail, and it's one of the industry sectors that's been most impacted. And so I'm just so interested to hear, Jan, what is your perspective on that industry's current situation and the trajectory as we move forward?
Well, thanks, John. First, John, thank you for having me here tonight. I'm really enjoying already listening to Keith, and I know Jack and yourself. It's just a very interesting time to get together and have this discussion. So thank you. I mean, you asked us about, the economic recovery and the way forward. Ultimately, the economic recovery, you just said it at the end of Keith's section, which is predicated on a functional solution to this virus. It really is. And so I believe in that as well. But I'd love to share with you a little bit about what I'm seeing in the shifting of behaviors from the consumer, from the workforce, and what I think it's going to be required as leaders as we go forward post or even in this moment of the virus and as we come out of it, because it will take time. I think there, as you mentioned, already had been headwinds in retail. And in fact, already been headwinds in almost every sector, short of the ones that are winning right now. If you aren't winning right now, you probably had headwinds coming into this. And in retail, of course, it was the channel shift to online. It was the casualization of the workplace and what we wore. It was fast retail, price value, cheap and cheerful product you could buy from Amazon to anywhere for a value. There was a lot of pressure on speed in manufacturing. And there were a lot of disruptors that were showing up. And there's probably 15 things. COVID basically accelerated the need for the industry to shift and move from a focus of just making the hour, making the day, and making the month to innovation, which, half of my career you mentioned is actually in manufacturing and in brands, and most recently in retail. And when you're in brands, you have to think that way. You constantly are innovating. But it all starts with the consumer. So I'd love to start first and talk a little bit about what I think are sustainable shifts that are happening in consumer behavior. And then I said workforce and how we lead. With the consumer, I think, moving from the globalization of retail to, I think, very, very local, very, very local is very important. Keith mentioned the communities, the neighborhoods, the towns. In China, we should be feeling that here. We are feeling that here. We are relegated, if we're managing for a functional solution, to our homes and our streets and our small towns. Even in New York, you can feel there are no tourists there. There are no commuters there. It's extremely local, even by neighborhood and by block. I think there's a loyalty in that consumers are expecting. They're realizing that the more I support my local businesses, the more that I stay close to home, the more loyal I am to them, the more loyal they are to me. And I think that service level is currency, and it does sometimes define who you shop with, and it keeps people connected. It definitely builds a community. It definitely builds trust, and I like that. I like that we're moving from the malls to Main Street in some respects. I think that's really important. The second consumer behavioral shift I think we're going to see is that people want fewer, better things. Fewer, better things. And so, this sweater, instead of two for the price of one might be one for the price of two, but there are things that you can hand down, things that you want to pass around, things that you covet more. I mean, you know, growing up with a sweater that's been in your family for a long time used to be a thing, and then it became not a thing until we all realized how much destruction that was doing to the environment, and that it was just wasteful at the end of the day. Bags of clothes that you were giving away or donating or, God forbid, throwing out. We all know what the waste situation is. So fewer, better things, a higher emphasis on quality and craftsmanship. I think people are going to be willing to pay for that effort and be thoughtful about it, which leads to my third shift. And there are many more. These are the three that I just chose for today, which is that pace, slower, more sustainable. As I mentioned, one for the price of two is a big deal. I think we've all learned a level of pace shifting in this moment. It is harder to do the things we usually do if we're going to do them at all. Things are moving slower. Normal things, whether that's getting your mail at the local post office that you have to go get, the line is longer. Of course, it's more spaced out. Of course, there's social distancing. How the postmaster is dealing with your mail, everything is slower. If you are going to stores, the process is slower. Everything. And I think that's a good thing. I think slowing us down is imperative. We really were, the virus is the virus, but the fact is that we weren't helping ourselves by the speed at which we were moving. I know myself, I was traveling every week on an airplane. That was no big deal. 2 cities in a week, 3 cities in a week, no big deal. It is a big deal. It's a big deal for our environment. It's a big deal for our health and wellness. It's a big deal, of course, around you know, how we operate and connect with people. And so I think slow might be the new fast. That's how I'll say it. Okay.
Yeah.
What does it mean to the workforce? I think what I'm learning from the teams is it requires a couple of things. Number one, macro management. You're sitting in your house and you're working through Zoom. I was 30 days in person in this job, and day 31 filing Chapter 11 and having to lead an organization of 10,000 people, including the people in the stores, through refinancing, restructuring from this computer in this chair. It requires a level of trust in the teams, but it also requires, I would say, 3 things. One, a very clear commitment to purpose. You know, the workforce, it's not just what a company's purpose is and what they're going to do for the community. It's also what the associate and the organization's purpose is. You know, why do I come here? You know, yes, you should recognize me. Yes, you should thank me and see my achievements and pay me fairly. But you also should be an organization committed to a better world. What are we doing about that is the demand of Gen Z right now. They're not loyal, and that's okay, but they are passionate and demanding, thankfully, around purpose. The second thing that we're seeing a shift is the obvious. Where will I work? You know, will I always work from home? Will I work in the office? When will I be back? Will I come back? What if I don't want to work from home? What if I can't work from home? You know, I remember sitting in a meeting, and there was an associate who was leading the meeting, junior associate, and I noticed she was really sweating. I'm like, gosh, it was summer, but she was really sweating. And she said out loud, you know, I'm sorry, I can't put my air conditioning on and run Zoom at the same time in my apartment. Okay, so not all working from home conditions are created equal. We think we know that, but till you witness kids sitting outside of a Starbucks trying to get on the Wi-Fi for school, or an associate who can't run her electricity at the same time without losing air conditioning, you know, what can we do? So where will I work? How do you create confidence and agility in the answer to that? How do you serve your associates in the office with a safe distance and all the safety measures, and at the same time serve them if they're staying home? And who should ever come back? And what does that mean to a New York City, to a Chicago, to a Boston, and the local businesses there? It's devastating right now. But the commuting is an issue, and safety and security is an issue. And then the third point I think that is not going to change is the voice listening from the bottom up, not the top down. You know, listening to the associates, listening to the consumer, listening to the community. You can see the impact of, in our global social pandemic, and the murders of George Floyd and so many, too many others, that Black lives do matter, and we needed to be told that. And that didn't come from the President of the United States or higher up. That came from the people. And we had to listen, and we should. And there's more listening to do. So the continued listening to the voices of the team, to the voices of the consumer, will allow us to create the future of the workforce and where they work. As a leader, it leads me right into the most important thing. We were talking about this, my kids are 13, they were in the car, they were talking about how unfortunate it is that this Thanksgiving and this time of year that we have to remember to always give people who are food insufficient a leg up. But this year was very hard to do that because of all of the restrictions around volunteering and donating food. So the paradox of so many more people needing help this year, and yet our ability to give less to people, not because we don't have it, but because of this virus. The discussion centered around how do we get out of this? Well, the answers were we grow the economy. How do we grow the economy? We create jobs. How do we do that? Innovation. Our country has been built and continues to be built and has proven itself and is proving now with the vaccine that we are a nation of innovation. We're not the only nation, as Keith pointed out, but we are a nation of innovation. But that innovation comes from, I fully believe, different voices at the table. Diversity, equity, inclusion is critical for the need to grow. If I hire everybody like me, we're gonna all like each other a lot. It's gonna be a really fun day, but we're only gonna get what I like and what they like. It's the same thing. We need innovation. At Nike, we fully embraced in footwear product creation, diverse ideas and thinking, diverse talent, so that we could get new ideas and solve the problems for people, athletes, and the environment. So number one, leaders have to understand that diversity, equity, inclusion breeds innovative thinking, and innovation is the key to growth. I think the second is that we have to be more heart than head, like super on our heart, hand on our heart, hearing the people we talked about, meeting them where they are, and frankly, just loving them up. There's a great coach in the NFL, Pete Carroll, who I really admire. He bucks the trend of the NFL by loving them up, not beating them up, and his results show. The team loves to play for that coach. And I love watching him coach. I'm a Patriots fan, but I love Pete Carroll. And so I have a lot of respect for the notion of loving up big, tough football guys. I think that's amazing. And if it works for them, it probably works for everybody else. So I try to bring that, along with the opportunity to empower people, hold them accountable, but empower them, be transparent as much as I can, and try to build that trust in team. So the heart really matters right now, not just the head. And then the last point as a leader is I think we do have to be data informed. I think data, big data, everybody wants the data. Okay, great. But data will sometimes only get you faster horses. It doesn't create the future. So data informed, not data driven entirely, is important. I think we have to measure more than the EBITDA dollars that we generate. We have to measure our progress on the things that matter most. And those are the things that create, as I mentioned, the innovation that grows business, whether it's diversity or sustainability, or forward thinking, or risking and failing and recovering. I think leaders shifting, and they are shifting into that mode versus just measuring bottom line, will encourage behaviors that we need as a country and that we need, frankly, as a world to thrive. So these are things that are not news, but these are things that have been, I'd say, imperative through this pandemic. Brands and businesses who have lean towards these things are winning, or have a path to recovery quite quickly once there's a functional solution, and they'll be part of the functional solution to the virus.
Yeah, I will say two things, Jan. One, that was a mini master's degree in business success, and I I hesitated to, like, I was going over, but it's so brilliant. And also just really impressed with the connection between business success and values, and all of social attention to social issues, environmental issues, just quite intriguing. I could dive deeper into that, but I do want to get to one of the questions that was in Q&A, and it probably is the contrast. I mean, you're talking about these value-based investments in a company's success, and yet you're facing in retail the Amazons with their large fulfillment centers, and retail shops are essentially becoming outlets for these large online retailers. How do you compete against that kind of competition?
Well, I think you have to just separate what success in commerce online versus what success is in brand building. And you have to decide whether brands matter or not. For me, I think the emotional connection that brands have with consumers, the trust, the relationship, the communication, the conversation is real. I think the commoditization, the speed and delivery that's needed on those items is also real, but they're two different things. And now, for how long? That's a really good question. The world could decide tomorrow that potato sacks are fine and we're good, we're carrying on. I'm not there yet. I think that there is emotion around working hard for your money, making a purchase that has purpose, feeling like you're doing good while you're doing well. I think that it is, there is retail therapy, it is real. I think there's something to be said, and I do believe in Main Street and the shopkeeper and that conversation. Retail therapy isn't just about buying something and feeling good, it's about the conversation, the connectivity. We as humans like that, the service. So I don't think it's an either or, I think it's an and. And I think that it's really important. And another piece of this is great brands are driven by great product and great experiences. And that comes from really creative thinking. And again, another essential for this country is to make sure the art of that thinking is encouraged, that the pipeline of talent is able to come from the home to the school to the companies to be able to be nurtured and to create new things for us to be delighted by, and that we didn't know we needed. I mean, did we really need bottled water? I don't know. So, you know, things come up that are inspiring, and they come up through very creative thinkers. We must continue to nurture that talent. Otherwise, yes, we're commoditized. We're in the sweatsuit. I mean, I don't know. It's fun for now. I think we're going to all get a little fatigued of that in 21, but and we deserve that to the design community and talent that's always coming up through the students.
Well, I'm going to hit you with one other question, and it was more of, I think it was more of a comment in Q&A, but it was, you know, the question of these values, and shouldn't that just be a given in any economic environment? And so it sounds like maybe you would suggest that it hasn't been, and wondering what your response would be.
I don't think it's been in the past necessarily. I mean, I like the shift that's happening even at the highest level. There's been consortium and discussions around much higher paid level CEOs than myself discussing how should public companies be measured? Is it really, you know, does the model work? Is, you know, the bottom line the bottom answer, or should there be measurements and leadership management teams held accountable for other changes that we need to see in order to drive a better economy and a future global economic structure? I think that's not new thinking for a certain demographic. For the students coming up today, they're like, of course, that's table stakes. But let me tell you, that isn't how people get paid. So what gets measured gets done. And how people get paid is how they're motivated. The shifting of that is really important. I like a balanced scorecard that has metrics that the team is accountable around talent and leadership and culture, and another box that has sales and EBITDA and productivity. You know, it's a balance, but I do think that it isn't. It hasn't been the case. I'm old enough to know that, but I'm encouraged that it is the expectation of the consumer, and I'm excited about leading teams and working for boards and you know, finance sponsors who are interested in that happening. That's my thing. I'm passionate about it, but it's a balance.
I love it. I so love those values. You would fit so well here in our community in Boulder. So we'll continue the conversation more with you, Jan, in just a little bit, but I want to move on now to Jack and just have a chance to chat with him directly. And so Jack Johnson is the Chief Advocacy Officer for Destinations International, where he manages their overall public policy operations, which includes member advocacy, education, and training, the development of destination tools and best practices, coalition work with peer organizations, industry research, and related public affairs activities. And I can tell you that here in our community, we've benefited already from Jack's great work in that industry research and counseling. He also oversees the board's governance, the Destination Management Accreditation Program, and Destination Next, the Assessment and Planning Program. He's been named one of the most successful meetings, 25, or he's been named one of successful meetings, 25 most influential people in the meeting industry in 2018. And here's the quote that I think sells him as somebody we need to be talking to. Johnson brings unrivaled experience developing innovative strategies, policy solutions, and civic consensus for government, not-for-profits, and small businesses. And as you know, Jack, we are very dependent here in our community on meetings, on tourism to lift our economy. So we need just those kinds of skills and advice. So what do you have to say for us?
First, thank you for inviting me. This is a great pleasure and a great panel to be on. Actually, I mean, I come from a very political background, which I fell into when I was like 12 years old. And my goal at that age, when everyone else wanted to be firemen or policemen or ball players, I wanted to be governor of Colorado. So this may be as close as I get to it. So first of all, usually when I start these type of presentations, I always like to take people back to the very beginning, which is go to Google, type in early humans, and then look at the images that come up. And what you'll see is lots of maps with arrows pointing on migration patterns. And that's because travel has been with us since the very beginning. It's part of our DNA. We have always been traveling. It's one of the pillars in which we've built our history. We have always come back after 9/11, when vehicles of travel were turned into weapons, we still came back from that. After the Great Recession, we came back from that. We were actually, bigger and better than any time in our history. I tell my peers that, stop for a moment, appreciate this moment, because travel has never been as impactful, as big, and affected so many people's lives in a positive way as it is right now. And just as I was getting traction on that, COVID happens, and then George Floyd happens, and then we just tumble into a recession that doesn't look like it's going to be V-shaped. It's more like a long check mark. So that's where we are today. Just the numbers so you appreciate the size of what the travel industry is. Travel and tourism already supports 1 in 10 jobs on the planet, okay? And 1 in 5 of the jobs that have been created over the last 5, 6, 7 years have all been related somewhat to travel. We are one of the fastest parts of the GNP. In fact, we grew faster than the average GNP for like the last 9 years. We actually led one of the industries that led our way back from the Great Recession. So we are positioned to do well. We know that people want to travel. There's a whole bunch of pent-up demand. And we also know that we're very good at coming back. We're actually quite nimble. If you think about all the technological changes and all the other types of changes that have affected the society we live in, travel has been buffeted by it left and right, and yet we keep getting bigger because it's inside of us. All right. What's happening now? Unprecedented damage. As bad as the scene is with retail, it's worse for the travel and tourism industry. We like to tell people that there is no recovery, no economic recovery unless this industry recovers, because we make up so much of the damage. We saw in one sweeping year, almost half of the spending in the US decline on travel, just gone. Industry losses are around over 500 billion by the end of the year, we think. We think by the time we get to 2023, it'll be over $1 trillion. 4.2 million travel supported jobs already gone. Hundreds and thousands of small businesses that make our destinations unique, restaurants and shops and all type of things are gone. And if the federal government doesn't get their act together and start another round of stimulus, we're probably going to lose another 1.3 million jobs. It's been devastating. There's no other way about it. The worst part of this is that we're kind of involved in the problem. Travel is generally influenced by all these economic conditions, whether in recession or not. But this particular one, COVID-19 pandemic, is really particularly bad because initially, at least, global travel was helped to spur it along. So similar to 9/11, we are now a vehicle for spreading this, or can be a vehicle spreading, if we don't follow safe travel, if you don't wear the mask, if you don't keep the 6 distance, if you don't wash your hands constantly, if you don't wipe things down. But there's still that view that travel has kind of pushed this pandemic along. So we're kind of on a cusp here. Now that we can see that vaccines are coming to us soon, the question is, okay, what happens next? Can we get there? And can we get over this idea that travel is part of the problem? And I think we can. Now, currently in the world, as you've already heard, Asia, at least on the Pacific side, is in great shape. New Zealand, Australia, even British Columbia, Canada, really great shape. And they've always been farther ahead for the particular reason is they've been wiping out the disease. That has been their purpose. Europe is beginning to open up, but they're still having spotty problems. And frankly, the Americas and Africa probably going to be the last ones. Canada in good shape on the Atlantic side and the Pacific side, little trouble in the middle. And then there's the United States, okay? We've never had enough testing. We have really poor contact tracing. We've had decentralized control of how to respond to this. We've had conflicting guidelines from state to state, and we've had blanket guidelines. There really actually is a difference between a wedding and a family party and a night out at the bar and a business meeting of 100 people or less in a hotel. One of those can actually be done very safely. Mm-hmm. So we have guidelines that change from week to week, and our industry has just kind of been buffeted by that. All right, so in the United States, who comes back? First of all, I don't see international travel coming back for a couple of years. Our borders to the United States are probably going to be closed longer than anyone else. I know a lot of people in Canada, very good friends, who really enjoy coming to the United States and look forward to the day when they can come back to the United States. But right now, the general feeling in Canada is keep that border closed. The other issue that really has got to be tackled is the issue of safety, because people are not going to look at travel the same way anymore. And they're not going to look at, they don't want to be the ones that have to go, okay, is our hotel safe, and check all the certificates? Do we have to check the restaurants we're going to, like that? We're basically looking, we're calling on our members with our destination organizations, convention and visitor bureaus or tourism bureaus, to actually take that lead post and create a safety pledge across the whole destination. So it achieves two things. One, potential visitors feel safe in coming to your destination, but also the other half of that coin is that residents feel safe welcoming visitors. Because if you don't get the two of those together, you're just asking for trouble. The other part is there a resident focus? If you think about the places that have done creative stuff, who've really dug in and helped to save their restaurants, have really kind of created this whole network of internal focus to rebound together, those are the destinations that are coming back. Destinations that completely shut down are going to take much, much longer. We mentioned values when we're talking about retail. That is actually huge in our area. The importance of values and sharing values with a destination is important. And those are the ones that are going to be attractive, whether it is sustainability, whether it's environmental stuff, but it's also political stuff. It's whether equity, diversity, inclusion is part of your message. Is your message diverse? Is your message welcoming? Those are the type of places that will come back. Places that are outdoor. I was talking to someone the other day. It's a good time to be Tulsa. It's probably a good time to be Boulder. It's not a good time to be New York City or Chicago. Those destinations that have strong outdoor events or activities that people can engage in are the ones that are going to go back. Places that people can drive to. The Great American Road Trip is back, okay? People are willing to drive anywhere from 200 to 500 miles, but they just feel safer in their own car. Despite the fact that in a plane right now, you're actually pretty safe. They have the best ventilation probably of anyone out there right now. But people will drive. anything that's connected to places like Route 66 or any of those great scenic byways up and down the Mississippi, those are the destinations that I'm telling people, pay attention, you can come back to faster. The other part is, even before all this happened, we were actually seeing second, third, even fourth tier destinations do really, really well. Because people are looking for a unique, authentic experience. I mean, now that Macy's is every place across the country, and Applebee's is every place across the country, and many other brands are every place across the country, they're looking for those places that are unique, those restaurants, those museums, those art districts, the music scene, anything that's culturally unique and live and can't be replicated. That's what people were looking for, and they were finding it a lot in those second, third, and even fourth tier cities. Those will, I think, bounce back first. And then we've got a couple problems that I don't know actually are going to affect us. One is the small business closures. Part of the uniqueness is those restaurants and those retail partners and those museums that are now just shut down. And how much of that inventory can be rebuilt, or how much of that inventory was saved by locals supporting them through this crisis, actually will be a decision maker on how, whether a destination comes back or not. And then the other issue is government funding. The federal government has racked up a huge deficit, and yet they still need to spend more to get us going. Our states and our cities have deficits that are incredibly large. We're talking trillions of dollars. We've got mass transit that are shutting down lines and stuff like that. All the instruments that help a destination work are being put under a budget crunch. And what's worse is a lot of that means they're going to cut back on destination promotion. And this is the worst time to do that, because the destination promotion keeps your destination in front of people, keeps it in mind. And even if they're not going there now, even if they're just doing virtual tourism on your websites or walking around other websites of things that are in your destination, that's still a positive impact, because at the end of the day, what tourism and travel does is not get people to visit. That's not the end we're looking for. The end is we create opportunities and we create jobs, because in order to get people to like to live somewhere, to invest somewhere, or to move somewhere, you got to get them to travel. If you build a place where people, want to visit, you've built a place where people want to live, and it goes on and on and on. So at the heart, like I said, our industry needs to come back. We've got a few problems here. Overall, economically, 21 is going to be a rough year. I think until the second half of the year, when we have a good feeling on whether the vaccines are working, whether there's been no surprise missteps with it, if people have stopped spreading the disease, if we actually get ahead of it, then I think by the fall, you'll start seeing schools opening up, the football season will be back on, people start traveling. There's still, if you're in a risk population, you're probably still wearing masks and stuff like that. But once you get to about September, and actually really more like October, November, December, that's when I think we'll actually see some normalcy. And that's when I hope we get back.
Wow. Well, I'll just say this, as any good presenter, you made the question that I had and the question in the Q&A irrelevant because you answered it. So very good. And so I think what I'm going to do is just take this opportunity, Jack, to just bring all three panelists back, because you guys, it just such rich conversation and just such great expertise in your areas of focus, but then I think just a broader sense of economic situation. And so this leads me to a question that I wanted to ask all three of you, and that is, and Jack, you alluded to it a little bit in terms of government support, government investment in the economic recovery. But I want to know, and I think it'll be interesting also to hear this from Keith's perspective, given the level that government plays in China, for example, in economic conditions. What do you think is the appropriate role for government in helping to lift back both in your industry sectors, but also with the economy overall? And what does that look like? And whoever wants to catch that first would be great.
I would argue that
Go ahead.
destination promotion for tourism actually is a common good. I mean, every community right now is competing with every other community in the world for not just tourists, but talent and investment and capital and stuff like that. So I think there is a role for government to help fund along with private sector partners, whether it's those in the hospitality industry or those who benefit by a destination that has a sound brand. A university, a hospital are actually people's major employers who want people to move to a destination. It's really all summed up in that brand, whether people like that destination, want to live that destination, do they trust that destination, do they share values with that destination? So there's actually a major role for government in this. One of the things I've liked, and maybe someone else can comment on this, what I've seen in many other countries is, and I think Richard originally said something about this, is investing in people directly, whereas opposed to the United States, we kind of invested in businesses to get to the people. And I wonder if that's has kind of hindered us as opposed to some of the other locations or destinations in the country, in the world.
Well, why don't you take that? Anyone, Jan, I see you stepping forward there.
Oh,
Your take.
yeah, no, I was just adjusting, but I mean, I look at it, I think, both are needed. I heard Keith say in China invested in businesses. I think I heard that, Keith. I don't know if that's correct, but
Right.
I think, for us, the stimulus checks that happen certainly are necessary because they do fuel retail, and retail, much like Jack's industry, again, one of the largest employers in the country, no footsteps in stores or no e-commerce, then we're furloughing again. So, and if we're furloughing, we're creating a vicious cycle with, again, people who are struggling without their pay. So I think the stimulus checks are important so that people can have their essentials that they need. And so they can also get out and get rolling into businesses. But at the same time, I was very interested in what China was doing around focusing on not the people necessarily in that way. They have a different government and different healthcare structure, but focusing on the businesses themselves. Those small businesses are what people come out for. So it is a balance. Again, it's a little bit of both for both sides of that conversation. I don't know if it can be one way or another in this country.
Mm-hmm. Keith, any perspective from yours, weighing what you see in China or internationally and what you might think that the United States government should be doing?
One big difference for what China has done that other countries have not really been able to do is to move forward very quickly on infrastructure projects. They had the plans ready, and so they simply approved a lot more of them. And the quality of infrastructure now in China is superb. I was in Fuzhou, as I mentioned last week, and the river environment there now looks so much like Paris along the Seine. It was really beautiful with sort of large stone walls, and even though there are some surviving churches, most of them were destroyed during the Cultural Revolution, which is a spasm of violence here in the late 1960s that lasted 10 years. But they have new buildings even that look like churches that are actually residential or business. But it is absolutely magnificent. And you see that in city after city across China, beautiful parks. I think zoning is very different here. They really managed to prohibit most single family housing in favor of tall apartment buildings with lots of parks in between. So they had the infrastructure plans in place for things that they wanted to invest in. The cities here really planned to make those investments. And then whenever there's a problem, as there was in the global financial crisis, or as there is now, or as there was also a little bit at the end of 2015, started 2016, when they had a stock market crash here, the government suddenly says, okay, go ahead with your infrastructure plans. And within a couple of months, things are getting built. And so that has also absorbed labor here so that you don't really have the unemployment problem that you do in other countries right now, except to some extent among young college graduates without technical degrees. But with that exception, most of the workforce is back at work. And the question for the US is, when will it be able to get its infrastructure up to snuff?
Well, let me do this. A couple of questions are coming in, so I want to make sure to get to them, and then also inviting all of the audience to please put your questions in the Q&A. But Jack, this is a specific one for you, very relevant to the Colorado experience. What do you project for the ski industry this year? Will it survive?
It definitely checks several boxes. I mean, it is outside. You can only fit so many people on a ski hill. So I think my only hesitancy is we've seen this as it's dragged on, really kind of hit some of the high-end properties and stuff like that. So I think it will be a lean year, but yeah, by all means, I do believe that they will survive. And I think actually they will really prosper the following year.
Really interesting.
Yes.
Okay. And then Keith, a question for you. Criticism politically about the World Health Organization. Wondering what your critique is of their response and what they could have done better.
Clearly, the World Health Organization, according to many critics, was slow to declare a pandemic. They were, on the one hand, trying to cooperate with the Chinese government to get as much information as they could, while at the same time trying to provide information to the rest of the world. But I think with hindsight, there should have been a declaration that this was a pandemic considerably earlier. Now, one difficulty is the World Health Organization is actually a rather weak organization in the sense of not having any enforcement powers, in the sense of relying essentially on donations of talent, expertise, and money from member governments. So they are not a health police of the world, but they are, to use Teddy Roosevelt's phrase about the US presidency, they are a bully pulpit. And so that is why a lot of people have been saying, why didn't they declare a pandemic earlier? And now people are saying, will the World Health Organization be able to figure out the origin of the virus? Very tough when, for example, the Chinese government would not let World Health Organization officials go around Wuhan and start asking their own questions when they recently were in China. So it's an organization that inherently has limitations, and that Trump has been pulling the U.S. out of, and that does, according to many people, seem to have been late in declaring a pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and you know, so that you do find problems just with the way that their ability to carry out. Well, here's a question directly for Jan, and it's one that gets to the heart of the values that you discussed. And the question is, how important is it for a business's board of directors to hold those values? And how do you make sure that you get a board that has those values?
The $1 million question. I think it's, well, first of all, it's the first part first. It's everything. You taking an assignment is really a very long process, and part of my process is to really understand who I'm working for. Everybody works for somebody. Even in a public company, you're working for the board members work for the shareholders. There's always a boss. And so for me personally, I spend, and with J. Crew, I spent a long time researching the group that held the company. And TPG, they had held the company for, over 15 years. So, I got to know them very well. I got to know their practice, their values. I spent time in their company with their teams for a long time. I wouldn't say 8 months, long time. And so I was very clear about where I wanted to go and what I thought was important. And we were very aligned. When you come through a bankruptcy, you emerge with new board members and a new board. So things can change. And that happens all the time. I think the other thing to know is that the CEO doesn't pick the board. It doesn't work that way. There's a chairman of the board, the sponsor, if it's private company, private equity, they're the sponsor, they are the chairman, you have a seat, you definitely have a say, but the board is developed in sometimes a manner where it's a process that the CEO doesn't run that table. There are times that they do. If you're a chairman and CEO, of course you do, but it doesn't work that way. And so you have a voice, and you are very tied to your chairman and sharing your vision and the growth path forward. And their job is to partner with you and the NomGov committees to assemble the right balance for that board to, yes, support the management team. But really, if you're public, you're representing the shareholders, and that's the check and balance in that case. So it's really important, and it's not an easy orchestrated effort.
Yeah. Okay. So moving from board governance to the very specific issues of retail, Jan, what the casual wear direction for business, is that a trend that you will see grow and continue, or is it something that we might see change?
Here's the great news. If the guys in Boulder are wearing ties, it's not changing so fast. So I'm shocked. I thank you, Keith, for a little bit more relaxed. Jack and John, I thank you for keeping shirts and ties in business, because we love that. I do think, look, we like we think it's going to be more relaxed, not retired. It's not going to be as relaxed as we are at home. My brother's a judge in Massachusetts. He told me recently on Zoom, he sent a lawyer home to get a shirt and tie, home meaning shut the screen off, get dressed, and come back to court. Because there's something to be said for, how we show up. I do think relaxed is important, not retired. I do think casualization is real, but it might be as simple as, again, a shirt and tie, no jacket, a shirt and jacket, no tie. That's relaxed for a lot of people. And it matters. I think we'll be very sick of the casualization that we're in right now. A lot of folks call it the COVID-19 pounds that they're gaining. Sometimes, swinging it back to a little bit more tailored is a nice, refreshing. And as soon as we have a reason to be out, whether it's to travel or to just even be with friends at an occasion, we go shopping. And so that's a really important moment to it. And I do think it will cycle back to something better than sweatpants.
Okay, well, being the only person in Boulder who wears a tie, I'm glad to know that maybe I'll be joined by a few other folks. Jack, here's a specific question for you, maybe our last one, given the time. What is the recipe for the entertainment industry to come back?
Do it without crowds. I think that's actually going to be one of the harder ones. I think sports comes back before entertainment. Entertainment that's outside comes back before entertainment inside. Events are so important. They actually kind of help define a place. They kind of help drive a place. They actually help with the brand of a place. So I think, again, like I said before, there is a great deal of pent-up demand. We find that in the research. It's a question on whether people feel safe to make that leap. And I guess in the end, if you can design an outdoor entertainment arena or an event that people will feel safe at, then it comes back. Otherwise, by May, I think it is, Dr. Fauci said most people will have will have a vaccine by then. If that's successful and if nothing goes wrong, maybe by Labor Day.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, listen, let me just say this. First of all, CWA does it again, Conference of World Affairs, bringing together just expert voices from diverse perspectives to address the most challenging issues of our day. And you panelists are no exception. So I just want to thank you all. I mean, I come out of this conversation energized and with great positive spirit about our coming out of this challenge, because I know that people like you are thinking about those strategies, and I just really appreciate your knowledge, expertise, and heart that you put into it. So thank you, Jack Johnson, Jan Singer, and Keith Bradsher, so much for your time today. And thank you to our audience for for joining us at this special CWA panel. And I wish all of you a great evening.